The first and most critical step in understanding how to compel God to act in your life is to recognize that God operates according to principles. There are spiritual laws, eternal truths that govern how God interacts with humanity. And unless you understand them and position yourself in alignment with them, you will never experience the fullness of His power. Many people approach God with a sense of entitlement, as if He is obligated to respond to their requests. But this is a grave misunderstanding. God is not a genie in a bottle, ready to grant wishes at whim. He is the sovereign ruler of the universe, and His favor is not arbitrary. The principles of God are revealed through His word, through the life of Jesus Christ, and through the natural order that He has established. To attempt to force God without first understanding His principles is to run against the current of a mighty river. You may struggle, you may exhaust yourself, but the results will not come because you are out of alignment with His order. The first principle to understand is the principle of purpose. God does nothing randomly, and He responds when He sees alignment with His divine purpose. Every man and woman has a purpose designed by God, a unique assignment, a calling that cannot be ignored. When you pray for God's help, you must examine whether your request aligns with His purpose for your life. Are you asking for something that will build His kingdom, that will glorify His name, that will expand your capacity to serve others? Or are you simply asking for selfish gain, for temporary comfort, or for convenience? The shocking truth is that God cannot and will not empower that which is contrary to His divine order. You cannot force God to bless disobedience. You cannot compel Him to respond to rebellion or selfishness. Many people are frustrated in their spiritual lives because they have never taken the time to discover their God-given purpose. They expect miracles without alignment, blessings without obedience, and favor without integrity. This is why so many prayers go unanswered, why so many attempts to influence the supernatural fall flat. If you want to see God move, the first step is to submit to His principles, to understand that He responds to order, and to position yourself squarely within His plan. The second principle is the principle of faith. Faith is not a vague hope or a wishful thinking. It is a concrete force that activates God's power. When you approach God, you must understand that He responds to faith, to confidence in His word, and to trust in His promises. But faith is not merely believing in God's existence. It is believing that His word is true, that His principles are real, and that He will act according to His character. Many people pray with doubt in their hearts, expecting God to act while secretly questioning His willingness or ability. This creates spiritual resistance. God cannot be forced in the presence of unbelief, because unbelief undermines alignment with His principle of faith. Faith is the key that unlocks the supernatural. It is the force that releases God's favor. You must believe not only that God can help you, but that He will help you because you are living in accordance with His design. This is shocking to many because it removes the idea of luck or random intervention from their understanding of divine action. God is not subject to your timing or your desperation. He is subject to principle, and principle requires faith. Faith is not passive, it is active. It is a conscious, deliberate decision to trust God's order, to act as if His word is true even when circumstances suggest otherwise, and to live in obedience to His truth. Without this, any attempt to force God is futile because it is not grounded in His spiritual laws. The third principle is the principle of obedience. Obedience is the visible expression of your alignment with God's principles. You may know His word, you may understand His purpose, you may have faith, but if your life is not obedient to His directives, you cannot compel Him to act. Obedience is not about legalism or fear. It is about positioning yourself in the channel of God's blessing. When you obey God, you are demonstrating that you acknowledge His authority and recognize His wisdom. This is where many believers fail. They pray for miracles while living in contradiction to God's commands. They expect divine intervention while ignoring the instructions God has already given them. Obedience is a principle that produces tangible results. It is not optional if you desire God's help. Consider the examples in Scripture where God's intervention was immediate and powerful. In every instance, there was alignment with His commands. From Noah building the ark in obedience to God's word, to Abraham stepping out in faith to offer Isaac, to the apostles who obeyed the Great Commission without hesitation. Obedience was the principle that made the supernatural possible. You cannot force God without it. The shocking reality is that God does not respond to prayer alone. He responds to lives that are surrendered to His will. Prayer without obedience is an incomplete equation, a demand without qualification, a request without foundation. Obedience is what positions you to receive. It is what prepares the ground for God's power to manifest. The fourth principle is the principle of timing. God's timing is perfect, and it is never according to human impatience or urgency. Many people fail to experience God's help because they do not understand that His actions occur within the framework of His divine schedule. You may be desperate. You may be crying out. You may be attempting every method to force God, but if you are out of sync with His timing, your efforts will be ineffective. Timing is a spiritual principle that governs the release of God's power. There is a divine moment for everything, a moment for healing, a moment for breakthrough, a moment for restoration, and a moment for promotion. Understanding this principle requires patience, discernment, and trust. You cannot manipulate God's clock. You can only position yourself to be ready when He decides to act. Many believers do not understand this, and they become discouraged or angry, thinking that God has forgotten them. But the shocking truth is that God's delay is not denial, it is preparation. His timing is always perfect, and your role is to maintain alignment, to continue living in faith and obedience, and to remain vigilant, knowing that the principle of timing will eventually bring His intervention. To attempt to force God before His time is to frustrate your own efforts and to act out of fear rather than faith. The fifth principle is the principle of sowing and reaping. God responds to the laws of sowing and reaping, which govern spiritual and natural prosperity. You cannot demand God's help while withholding your own resources, talents, or energy from the work He has placed before you. Sowing is the act of investing in alignment with God's principles, and reaping is the result of that investment. This principle applies to generosity, to service, to the use of your gifts, and to the stewardship of your resources. When you give, when you serve, when you invest in God's kingdom, you are creating a spiritual momentum that releases His power into your life. Many people pray for help while hoarding their blessings, refusing to give, or ignoring opportunities to sow into others. This creates a blockage that cannot be overcome by mere pleading. God's help is always proportional to your willingness to align with His law of sowing and reaping. The shocking reality is that the universe itself is structured around this principle. It is a spiritual law as certain as gravity. You cannot ignore it, and you cannot force a supernatural response without it. Every act of obedience, every sacrifice, every investment of your life in alignment with God's kingdom contributes to an environment in which His power can operate. The sixth principle is the principle of humility. God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. To compel God's help, you must approach Him with a heart that acknowledges your dependence, your need, and your position as His creation. Pride is one of the greatest obstacles to experiencing God's intervention. When you approach God with arrogance, entitlement, or self-reliance, you are positioning yourself outside His order. Humility is not weakness. It is the strength that recognizes that without God, you can do nothing. Many believers struggle with this because they equate humility with inferiority, but humility is the key that unlocks the door to divine favor. It is the recognition that God's wisdom, power, and authority are far beyond your comprehension, and that aligning with Him requires surrender. The shocking truth is that God's help is always available to the humble, but the proud will never experience it, no matter how much they demand, no matter how loud their prayers, no matter how persistent their pleas. Humility is a principle that positions you to receive, and it is non-negotiable in the process of compelling God's assistance. The seventh principle is the principle of persistence. Compelling God requires endurance, a relentless refusal to give up, and a commitment to remain aligned with His principles even when results are not immediately visible. Many people give up too soon, thinking that their prayers are not being heard or that God has abandoned them. This is a fundamental misunderstanding. Persistence is a spiritual principle that demonstrates faith, obedience, and alignment over time. The longer you remain consistent, the more your life conforms to God's order, and the more natural it becomes for His power to operate. The shocking reality is that persistence is often what separates those who experience breakthroughs from those who do not. Many believers fail to understand that the spiritual world responds to patterns, to consistency, to the unwavering demonstration of alignment with God's principles. To compel God, you must refuse to be swayed by temporary setbacks, to ignore discouragement, and to continue in faith, obedience, humility, and purpose. The supernatural responds to discipline, not impulsive emotion. The eighth principle is the principle of spiritual authority. God has given mankind authority in His creation, authority to speak, to act, and to enforce His will under His direction. Many believers are unaware of the power of the words they speak, the decisions they make, and the authority they exercise in alignment with God's principles. Understanding and exercising spiritual authority is crucial to compelling God's help. Authority is not a license to manipulate God. It is the ability to function within His order and enforce His principles in your life and in the deviant circumstances around you. Those who fail to recognize their God-given authority are often passive, waiting for God to act without taking the actions that He has empowered them to take. The shocking truth is that God often works through the authority He has placed in you, and the more you exercise that authority in alignment with His principles, the more His power is released. The ninth principle is the principle of relationship. God responds to those who cultivate intimacy with Him. Compelling God is not about manipulation, bargaining, or formulaic rituals. It is about deepening your relationship with the Creator. Relationship produces trust, obedience, and alignment. It produces the clarity needed to recognize His will and the faith to act upon it. Many people pray without relationship. They ask for results without seeking God Himself. The shocking reality is that God's help is not merely transactional, it is relational. When you cultivate closeness with Him, you naturally align with His principles, understand His timing, exercise your authority appropriately, and act in obedience. Relationship is the foundation upon which all other principles rest. The 10th principle is the principle of vision. God responds to those with clarity of purpose, a defined destiny, and a vision that aligns with His plan. You cannot force God without seeing the end from the beginning. Vision produces focus, determination, and an ability to act in accordance with His principles. Many believers wander aimlessly, hoping for intervention without knowing what they are supposed to receive or why. The shocking truth is that God's power is released in the context of vision. Without it, your prayers are scattered, your faith is weak, your obedience inconsistent, and your alignment incomplete. A clear vision of God's purpose for your life crystallizes all principles, magnifies your faith, directs your obedience, and positions you perfectly for divine intervention. Faith-filled declarations are not just words. They are the voice of authority in alignment with God's principles. Many people underestimate the power of what they speak, thinking that prayer is only about asking, begging, or expressing desires. They fail to realize that words carry creative force, that God has placed authority in human speech, and that the declarations you make in faith can literally activate the power of heaven on your behalf. God responds to the faith you release through your voice, to the confidence that accompanies your words, and to the alignment of those words with His eternal principles. To speak effectively, to compel God to act, you must understand that your words are a spiritual tool, a conduit for supernatural results. This is shocking to many because it challenges the passive approach to prayer. You are not merely petitioning God, you are partnering with Him through the spoken word. The first thing to understand about faith-filled declarations is that they are statements of truth, not hope. Too often believers pray in uncertainty, saying, "I hope God will do this for me," or "I wish God would intervene." These are not declarations, they are expressions of doubt. Faith-filled declarations are absolute. They assert what is already true in the spiritual realm. You must declare victory, prosperity, health, and favor as though it is already accomplished. When Jesus spoke to the storm, He did not say, "I hope this storm will calm." He said, "Peace, be still." His declaration carried authority because it aligned with the principles of heaven and the power of His faith. To compel God, you must learn to speak in this manner, to release words that carry certainty, authority, and expectation. Your declarations are not empty, they are energetic expressions of alignment with God's will and His laws. The second aspect of faith-filled declarations is the element of consistency. It is not enough to declare once and then doubt, complain, or question. Your words must be persistent, repeated with unwavering confidence until the spiritual forces around your situation respond. Many believers pray with passion once and then give up when results do not appear immediately. This reveals a lack of understanding of the spiritual principle of persistence combined with verbal authority. The universe, structured by God's order, responds to patterns, to repeated declarations, and to unwavering faith. When you consistently declare the promises of God over your life, you are creating a spiritual momentum that heaven cannot ignore. This is shocking because most people approach prayer as a momentary activity, not as a disciplined spiritual exercise. Speaking in faith requires patience, endurance, and the refusal to be swayed by circumstances. The third principle is alignment with God's word. Your declarations must be based on His promises, not your imagination. You cannot declare outcomes that contradict His principles or His revealed word. Many people attempt to force God by speaking declarations that are rooted in selfish ambition, pride, or rebellion. These words are powerless because they lack spiritual authority. To activate God's power, your declarations must resonate with His truth. If God has promised provision, declare it. If He has promised healing, speak it. If He has promised guidance, affirm it. The shocking truth is that the authority of your declarations is proportional to their alignment with divine principles. Misaligned words produce no effect. They may even create resistance. God's power responds to obedience expressed through speech. Your declarations are effective when they echo the reality that already exists in the spiritual realm. The fourth element is belief in the spoken word. Speaking declarations is not a mechanical exercise. It requires that your spirit agrees with your words. You cannot declare in faith while your heart is filled with doubt, fear, or skepticism. Many people speak with their lips but do not believe in their hearts, and their words return void. God's power is activated when your internal conviction matches your external expression. Faith-filled declarations require total agreement between your mind, your heart, and your speech. The shocking reality is that God responds not to the volume of your voice, not to your eloquence, not to your emotional intensity, but to the authority of faith that undergirds your words. You must speak with confidence, knowing that what you say has already been ordained by God's principles. The fifth principle is the integration of gratitude into your declarations. Many believers focus solely on requests, constantly asking, pleading, and demanding, but fail to express thanksgiving. Gratitude is a spiritual accelerator. It shifts your perspective from neediness to trust, from fear to faith. When you declare in gratitude, you are acknowledging that God is already at work, that His principles are already in motion, and that His intervention is forthcoming. This is shocking because most prayers focus on lack, but God responds to faith expressed in confident acknowledgement of His power. Your declarations are more potent when they are anchored in thankfulness, for gratitude creates a spiritual atmosphere that attracts divine favor. You are not asking God to act. You are declaring that His power is already in motion, and you are participating in that reality with expectation and joy. The sixth principle is the use of specific, precise declarations. Vague statements produce vague results. To compel God, you must articulate your words with clarity and precision, defining exactly what you are speaking into existence. When you declare, "I am blessed," it is not wrong, but it lacks specificity. Declare exactly what blessing you are walking into, what doors are opening, what health is being restored, and what provision is being released. The shocking truth is that God's power is activated by clarity, because clarity creates alignment. The spiritual realm responds to specific authority, to defined declarations, to words that have direction and purpose. Precision is not arrogance. It is recognition of the order of heaven and your partnership in that order through speech. The seventh principle is speaking in agreement with others who share the same faith. Unity amplifies declarations. When two or more people declare in faith concerning the same matter, God honors their agreement. Many believers attempt to compel God alone, but collaboration in faith multiplies spiritual authority. The shocking reality is that agreement in faith produces a compound effect, increasing the spiritual energy behind your declarations. This is why the early church in Acts experienced miraculous results when believers united in prayer. You must recognize that your declarations are most potent when they resonate with the voice of others aligned with God's principles, creating a symphony of authority that heaven cannot ignore. The eighth principle is the authority of naming and confessing God's promises over circumstances. To compel God, you must declare His word over the obstacles, the challenges, and the apparent impossibilities in your life. Name them, speak over them, and declare God's authority above them. This is shocking to many because they have been taught to avoid confrontation with their difficulties. But the truth is that spiritual authority is exercised through declaration. When you confront the storm with the words of faith, when you declare God's supremacy over lack, illness, or oppression, you activate divine power. Speaking in faith is not passive. It is a confrontation with the natural realm using the weapons God has provided: words, faith, and authority. The ninth principle is envisioning as you declare. Declarations are amplified when accompanied by a mental picture of the outcome. God responds to vision because vision aligns the spirit with the declaration. Many believers fail to visualize their prayers as accomplished reality, and this weakens the potency of their words. The shocking truth is that your imagination, when aligned with God's principles, becomes a tool of supernatural activation. Picture your breakthrough, your healing, your promotion, your restored relationships, and declare them as present realities. This unites your mind, spirit, and speech into a single force that heaven cannot ignore. The 10th principle is persistence despite the unseen. Many people stop declaring when there is no visible evidence of change. But faith-filled declarations are effective precisely because they continue in the absence of natural proof. Compelling God requires that you keep speaking, keep believing, and keep declaring, even when circumstances remain unchanged. The shocking reality is that God often responds, not at the moment you speak, but when your consistent declarations have aligned you fully with His principle of timing, authority, and power. Persistence demonstrates faith, strengthens alignment, and activates spiritual authority. To stop is to forfeit the supernatural momentum you have built through your words. The 11th principle is guarding your words. Once you understand the power of declarations, you must be careful what you speak. Negative, doubtful, or fear-filled words counteract faith-filled declarations. Many believers unknowingly sabotage their own prayers by speaking frustration, despair, or disbelief. The shocking truth is that every word you speak carries energy that either aligns with God's principles or opposes them. Faith-filled declarations must dominate your speech, saturating your life with expectation, confidence, and authority. You must be vigilant over your tongue because it is a primary tool through which God's power is activated. The 12th principle is integrating actions with declarations. Faith-filled words are powerful, but they are multiplied when accompanied by obedience and action. Speaking alone, without alignment through deeds, diminishes authority. Many believers attempt to force God with words while neglecting the practical steps He has already commanded. The shocking reality is that God often waits to act until He sees corresponding action from you, a demonstration that your declarations are not empty, that they are grounded in faith expressed through obedience. Your actions must mirror your words, creating an unbroken line of alignment between declaration, faith, and principle. The 13th principle is resisting the influence of the natural senses. Often, what we see, hear, or feel tempts us to doubt or adjust our declarations. Compelling God requires speaking faith-filled words despite contrary circumstances. Many believers stop declaring because the evidence around them appears negative. But God's power is activated not by appearances, but by unwavering faith-filled speech. The shocking truth is that faith overrides the natural. And your declarations are the instrument through which this override occurs. Persist, declare, and refuse to be influenced by what seems impossible, remembering that the spiritual realm responds to authority expressed through words, not human logic or emotion. The 14th principle is celebrating every small evidence of alignment. When you declare in faith, acknowledge even the smallest manifestation of God's intervention. This reinforces belief, strengthens your declarations, and magnifies momentum. Many believers fail to recognize minor breakthroughs, and as a result, their declarations lose intensity. The shocking reality is that acknowledgement fuels faith, and faith fuels declarations, creating a cycle that draws God's power closer to full manifestation. Every small victory is a spiritual signpost, a confirmation that your words are effective and that heaven is responding. The 15th principle is living in expectancy. Your declarations must be spoken with anticipation, as though God has already acted. Many believers speak with desperation or uncertainty, weakening the authority of their words. The shocking truth is that God responds to expectancy, to the mindset that aligns belief, declaration, and action with the certainty of divine intervention. Speak as if the outcome is guaranteed, act as if it is inevitable, and live as though God's power is already working. This is the key to activating God's response through the words you declare. Faith without action is dead. It is one of the most shocking realities that many believers have been taught incorrectly, that prayer alone, without action, is enough to compel God's help. The truth is that God has designed a partnership with humanity. He moves in response to obedience, alignment, and action. Bold, consistent action is not a sign of self-reliance or independence. It is a demonstration of faith. It is the physical expression of the spiritual alignment that activates divine intervention. You cannot demand God's help passively. To compel Him, you must move, act, and step into your assignment with confidence that He will meet you in your obedience. Many believers wait, pray, and hope, but their inaction limits God's ability to respond. This is shocking to hear because it goes against the common perception that God is solely a responder to words. He responds to alignment, expressed through deliberate, courageous movement. The first aspect of bold action is courage. God will not force Himself into your life when you are paralyzed by fear. Fear is the enemy of faith. It blocks your ability to act in alignment with His principles. Boldness is a declaration of trust, a spiritual posture that says, I know God is with me, and I will move forward regardless of obstacles. Many people hesitate because they are afraid of failure, rejection, or criticism. But to compel God, you must step into the unknown with confidence in His power, knowing that every step taken in faith creates a pathway for divine intervention. The shocking truth is that God often waits to see bold action before He moves in a miraculous way. Boldness is the trigger that releases supernatural support, and without it, prayers remain unanswered. The second principle is consistency. Bold action is not a single event. It is a repeated, disciplined demonstration of faith. You cannot act once and then retreat in doubt, expecting God to complete what you abandoned. Consistency demonstrates trust, determination, and alignment with divine principles. The spiritual realm responds to patterns and repetition. The spiritual, every day that you act in faith, every decision to move despite uncertainty, every step taken in obedience strengthens your position for God's intervention. Many believers grow frustrated because they stop too soon, thinking that initial effort is enough. The shocking reality is that persistence multiplies God's power. Consistent action produces momentum that heaven cannot ignore. You cannot force God in one moment, but you can position yourself to receive by moving consistently over time. The third principle is clarity of action. God's help responds to purpose-driven movement. It is not enough to act. Your action must align with your God-given purpose. Many believers act frantically, reacting to circumstances, chasing every opportunity without discernment, and expecting God to intervene. This scattered activity is ineffective because it is misaligned. God intervenes when your bold action is directed toward your destiny, your calling, and the expansion of His kingdom through your life. The shocking truth is that aimless action produces effort without result. Your movement must be calculated, focused, and grounded in a clear understanding of God's will. Purpose gives weight to action, and weight activates divine response. The fourth principle is obedience. Bold action is always rooted in God's instructions. You may take courageous steps, but if they contradict His principles, they will not produce the results you desire. Many believers attempt to force God's hand by acting independently of His guidance, assuming that sheer determination will compel intervention. This is a grave error. God's power is released in partnership with obedience, and actions outside of His instructions lack authority. Obedience is the channel through which bold action becomes effective. It ensures that your movement is sanctioned by heaven and aligned with the spiritual laws that govern results. The shocking reality is that God honors obedience over desperation, and His intervention is often withheld until alignment is demonstrated through action. The fifth principle is initiative. You cannot wait passively for opportunities to appear and then expect God to intervene. Bold action requires that you take initiative, identify the opportunities He has placed before you, and step forward with determination. Initiative demonstrates leadership, confidence, and recognition of your authority as a co-laborer with God. Many believers wait for divine instructions as if God will hand them success on a silver platter, but God's help often arrives in conjunction with the initiative you display. The shocking truth is that those who act decisively are often the recipients of miraculous favor because their movement invites God to respond. Initiative transforms prayers from theoretical to practical, from passive to active, and from hopeful to powerful. The sixth principle is perseverance in the face of opposition. Bold, consistent action is rarely smooth. Obstacles, challenges, and resistance are inevitable. Many people give up at the first sign of difficulty, thinking that delay or hardship indicates divine rejection. The shocking truth is that obstacles often confirm alignment rather than negate it. God's help is activated when you persist despite adversity, when you refuse to be swayed by difficulty, and when you continue to act in faith. Every act of perseverance strengthens your spiritual position, proving that you are serious about your alignment and deserving of intervention. Bold action is validated by endurance, and endurance is rewarded with supernatural results. The seventh principle is action combined with prayer. Boldness without prayer is recklessness. Prayer without action is passivity. The two must work together in harmony. Prayer aligns your spirit with God's will, clarifies your purpose, and activates His principles, while action positions you physically to receive and demonstrate faith. Many believers separate these elements, either acting without prayer or praying without moving. The shocking truth is that God's help is most powerful when both are integrated. When you act boldly while continually seeking guidance, God can multiply your efforts in ways that defy human understanding. This combination creates a spiritual synergy that cannot be ignored by the forces of heaven. The eighth principle is accountability. Bold action is strengthened when conducted with integrity and under the influence of wise counsel. Many believers act impulsively, relying solely on their perception or desires, which can lead to missteps. Accountability ensures alignment with God's principles, validates purpose, and protects you from error. The shocking reality is that God often positions people, mentors, or circumstances to confirm your direction and actions, and failing to heed this guidance limits His intervention. Bold action partnered with accountability magnifies power because it demonstrates discernment, humility, and readiness to respond to divine correction. The ninth principle is adaptability. Bold action requires flexibility. Circumstances change, challenges arise, and God's methods may differ from your expectations. To compel His help, you must be willing to adjust, pivot, and refine your approach without abandoning your purpose or faith. Many believers give up when their plans do not unfold exactly as they envisioned, thinking that God has withheld favor. The shocking truth is that God often works through unexpected avenues, and your readiness to adapt ensures that His power flows unimpeded. Bold, consistent action includes the intelligence to move strategically, not rigidly, allowing heaven to respond in alignment with its perfect wisdom. The 10th principle is gratitude in action. As you move boldly, celebrate every small breakthrough, every open door, and every step forward. Gratitude is not only a response to success, but a mechanism that attracts further intervention. Many believers fail to acknowledge God's involvement in the process, focusing only on the end result. The shocking truth is that recognition of divine assistance reinforces alignment, strengthens faith, and invites accelerated intervention. Bold action combined with gratitude creates an environment where God's power can operate freely and abundantly. The 11th principle is alignment with divine principles of timing. Bold action must be synchronized with God's schedule. Acting too early or too late can diminish the impact of your efforts. Many believers attempt to force results outside of God's timing, resulting in frustration or apparent failure. The shocking reality is that timing is a critical element of divine intervention. Bold, consistent action, when coordinated with God's schedule, activates supernatural assistance and ensures that your efforts are multiplied rather than wasted. Understanding this requires patience, discernment, and spiritual sensitivity. The 12th principle is bold action in the face of doubt. Many believers hesitate because of uncertainty or lack of visible results. The shocking truth is that God often intervenes precisely when human doubt is greatest. Action taken in the presence of doubt demonstrates faith, and faith activates His power. Boldness is not absence of fear. It is the ability to act despite fear, to move forward when the natural senses contradict what the Spirit knows. Compelling God requires this courage, this willingness to act in defiance of uncertainty and to trust His principles even when the world seems uncooperative. The 13th principle is risk-taking. Bold action requires calculated risk. God rewards those who step beyond the comfort zone, who leave behind security for the sake of alignment with His purpose. Many believers remain stagnant because of fear of loss, judgment, or failure. The shocking truth is that risk, when guided by faith, obedience, and principle, becomes the vehicle for supernatural breakthrough. Without risk, there is stagnation. Without action beyond the familiar, God's intervention is limited. Bold action acknowledges risk but refuses to be paralyzed by it, moving forward in confident expectation of divine assistance. The 14th principle is alignment with spiritual authority. Bold action must recognize and respect the authority God has placed in your life. Acting independently without acknowledging spiritual principles or accountability diminishes effectiveness. The shocking reality is that God's help is released most powerfully when your actions operate within the framework of His authority, respecting His order, and exercising the authority He has given you to act decisively. Alignment ensures that your boldness is not reckless, but sanctioned by heaven. The 15th principle is vision-guided action. Bold, consistent action is ineffective without a clear understanding of the end goal, the purpose, and the desired outcome. Many believers act impulsively, hoping God will fill in the gaps, but God works most effectively with those who have clarity of vision. The shocking truth is that vision magnifies boldness, channels consistent effort, and activates divine intervention. When you see the end from the beginning and act accordingly, every step becomes a strategic alignment with God's principles, and your movement becomes irresistible to His power.